Hello, welcome to the 2021 Rivers Edge West Riparian Restoration Conference, the Creative Tools for Community Engagement panel. My name is Alyssa Richmond. I am an employee of the San Juan Soil and Water Conservation District and the coordinator for the San Juan Watershed Group based in Aztec, New Mexico, which is the northwest corner of New Mexico. I am very excited to be able to share the work that the Watershed Group has done and the creative interactive mapping tools that we have been using through virtual meetings to spearhead the watershed planning process for our development of a San Juan River restoration plan for the New Mexico stretch of the San Juan Watershed. Without further ado, let's get started. So first, to offer some background on the San Juan Watershed Group, the Watershed Group was first convened in 2001 after the local community expressed concerns on algae blooms that were choking the Animas River. And this really spearheaded the local community to organize and collaborate with other stakeholders throughout the watershed and the New Mexico Environment Department Surface Water Quality Bureau to begin the watershed planning and process. This involved doing several water quality sampling studies to further identify hotspots for nutrient, bacteria, and sediment contributions that are impacting the current water quality impairments that have been identified by the Surface Water Quality Bureau, and through that research, be able to go through the watershed planning process to identify, prioritize, and implement projects to improve watershed health and water quality for the San Juan Basin and specifically through the New Mexico stretch of the Animas River. And throughout all of this watershed planning activities and projects that have been done by the Watershed Group, we also conduct community outreach and education events for the local community to share what is our water quality looking like in the San Juan Basin and why it's important for us to do work on improving water quality throughout the Animas and San Juan rivers, and to be able to explain what that looks like on the ground for work that improves watershed health and water quality. So since the Watershed Group was convened in 2001, we have developed the Lower Animas Watershed-Based Plan. This was accepted by the EPA in 2016 and has been the work plan that the Watershed Group has been using to conduct water quality improvement projects on the New Mexico stretch of the Animas River. The Lower Animas Watershed Plan was based off of the 2011 Animas Watershed Plan that the Animas Watershed Partnership, a sister watershed group on the Colorado side of the Animas, developed. And we noticed that there was more information that was needed to identify sources, solutions, and pathways to do so for the New Mexico stretch of the Animas River. So through this Lower Animas Watershed Plan, we first identified water quality problems that have been detailed by the NMED Surface Water Quality Bureau, looking at the impairments that have been identified, including E. coli, nutrients, and sedimentation, and also conducting further research on sources for E. coli bacteria, which have led to us to document the high levels concentrations of human fecal bacteria also along the Animas and the San Juan rivers. And through this water quality sampling, we're able to look at potential sources that are contributing to these impairments. Anything from heavy agricultural and livestock use throughout the Lower Animas stretch, looking at areas with poor soil health, lack of vegetation in riparian areas, and other sources that are contributing to the human fecal concentrations along the Lower Animas. And with us identifying these potential sources, we are looking at this watershed plan looks at solutions, agriculture and livestock best management practices that can be implemented throughout the area, everything from invasive species removal to revegetation throughout the Lower Animas River, really hitting home with low impact development principles for stormwater runoff, outreach, and the like. And through identifying these sources and solutions, we're able to identify the partners that are necessary, the funding that would be required to be able to implement those projects on the ground. And so the Animas plan has really been our work through of being able to implement these projects, monitor how they're doing, and being able to conduct adaptive management to continuously update the lower Animas plan so that it can live as a document in perpetuity for the community and the stakeholders throughout the watershed to keep track of our progress in improving water quality or improving water quality and hopefully leading to the delisting of the impairments that are currently identified on the lower Animas stretch. And so to give you guys an idea of the type of projects that we have been implementing through the lower Animas plan, there are several different categories of projects that we have conducted since 2011. This interactive map that you can see here is available on the San Juan Watershed Group website and the link listed below on the map to be able to interactively explore all the projects that the San Juan Watershed Group has conducted since 2011. So to give you guys an idea of projects that have been conducted specifically throughout this plan, first off, there is projects that are focusing on erosion control. This is a project that was in the upland arroyo, contributing to the upper reach of the lower Animas River, that is rebuilding banks on a heavy erosion arroyo that was contributing to heavy erosion that was experienced by a winter grazing pasture. This has been very successful with redeveloping that bank and promoting the establishment of riparian vegetation for further stabilization. Other projects that we have done is the agriculture and livestock best management practices. Our current methods have been working with landowners to do livestock exclusion fencing, developing filter strips that can be able to filter bacteria and nutrients that are being contributed through runoff after high storm events, and being able to filter those and decrease concentrations that are being contributed before it reaches the Animas River. Other projects that have been conducted that are more bacteria based through partnerships with the Natural Resource Conservation Service is working to develop waste containment facilities for livestock and horse rescue operations. This one specifically is looking at a waste containment facility for a horse rescue in the Flora Vista area, about 3/4 of the way down of the New Mexico stretch of the Animas River. And also looking at other projects such as irrigation ditch improvements that were leading to high disturbance rates that were contributing sediment. This project here is just one that was recently completed back last month of installing a new cross vein diversion structure for the Ranchman's Terrell ditch, also about 3/4 down of the Animas. This led to less disturbance for the ditch association, which they had to conduct multiple times on an annual basis to maintain the cobble-up push-up dam that was originally there. Not only did this project help reduce disturbance, reduce sedimentation, but also improved water availability for users along the Ranchman's Terrell ditch. And so the Lower Animas Watershed Base Plan has been an excellent tool for the San Juan Watershed Group to conduct. However, there were some lessons learned throughout that development. For example, whenever we first began the watershed planning process for the Lower Animas Watershed Plan, we started with doing water quality sampling at tributary inflows, ditch outflows, and inflows throughout the watershed to be able to identify hotspots. However, we did start with the GIS analysis and the stakeholder engagement later into the process. And in reflecting back, we're able to see that if we had started that process a little bit sooner to develop that network and have more community involvement into developing the plan, we could be able to have more detailed water quality sampling that led to answering more of the questions that the community has arisen, and also with developing relationships with stakeholders for potential projects that could be done, landowners who were available and interested to be able to collaborate with us to really build those long-term relationships that could lead to steady implementation of projects long-term into the future. So building off of the projects that have already been conducted on the New Mexico stretch of the Animas River, which is a main tributary into the San Juan River, we are adapting our lessons learned from the Lower Animas Plan to spearhead the watershed planning process for the San Juan River. And whenever we first submitted funding for this project with the Bureau of Reclamation to be able to conduct this watershed planning process, we are focusing on the stretch of the San Juan River between Navajo Dam and the New Mexico state boundary of the San Juan River. We decided to do the inverse approach through GIS analysis and stakeholder listening sessions to really start building that network of stakeholders throughout, understanding what projects are available that meet community values, seeing what type of data gaps are available of concerns and restoration potential that the community has identified to be able to have projects that reflect community values, more buy-in, and be able to have the most influential projects with the most best bang for the buck, while also still being able to have the biggest impact for the most people. And in this process, we're really starting with this process first. We didn't intend it to be in a virtual format, but we have been using this interactive mapping tools to be able to develop this watershed network, be able to develop more connections, build off the momentum from the lower Animas plan into developing a further larger watershed network throughout the entire San Juan Basin on the New Mexico side. And so to give you guys a background on how we started with this watershed planning process. First is to take an inventory of your future dream team. Through the GIS analysis and building off of having discussions with stakeholders that we already have relationships on the lower Animas, we're able to develop a stakeholder list of organizations that are already conducting work throughout the watershed, both federal, state, tribal, university, local government, local programs, nonprofit, to develop that list and a step-by-step of who we want to reach out to. And when first developing some of these relationships were already developed, such as with Dene College, with Natural Resource Conservation Service, Animas Watershed Partnership. We wanted to further develop further partnerships by first attending and guest speaking in as many meetings as possible. And in building those relationships first off, it really had a domino effect of further networks and further partners that were identified to be able to continue to develop those relationships. And through that work and creating the awareness that this project is going on, getting as many people involved, first by attending those meetings, we were then able to host these private and group virtual meetings through Zoom to be able to share information, collaborate, and plan in an interactive way. One great example of this whole process is an inventory specifically that was done with stakeholders on the Navajo Nation. Building off of a partnership that we had with Dene College, Dene Environmental Institute, there was identified need to have a Russian Olive community forum on the Navajo Nation on the Shiprock chapter. Being able to start with hosting that meeting, that community learning session, we're able to identify other stakeholders who could help out, such as the Bureau of Indian Affairs. By listening to the community input, noticing that there was a community consensus need to inventory and start treating Russian olives specifically on the San Juan, the BIA and Dene College and the San Juan Watershed Group have a tight-knit partnership to be able to develop a proposal, which has been partially funded, to do an overall Russian olive inventory throughout the San Juan Basin, specifically from the beginning of the Navajo Nation boundary at the hogback of the San Juan River all the way into Utah. And this partnership would not have been able to happen by building off the relationship that we already had with Dene College, starting to hosting those meetings with the local Shiprock chapter house, and have that domino effect and having a tight-knit relationship with the Native communities, with BIA, Dene College, and individual Shiprock chapter houses. So this is a tool that has been in development and has been very effective for the San Juan Watershed Group, as in how do these virtual meetings look like? What are some processes that have worked for us to be able to host these virtual meetings through Zoom? we have adapted a web map with ArcGIS Online. This is a web mapping service that is available through creating an ArcGIS Online account with Esri software and purchasing a $500 annual ArcGIS Online licensing fee. Now, we decided to go with ArcGIS Online because it is more user-friendly, more of an open, easier to adapt interface on entering data, being able to catalog certain data that we're collecting than, say, with Google Earth or with ArcMap Desktop. And so I will be back for just a second to give you a brief rundown on how this tool works and how we have developed it to meet the needs of our project. And we're back. So this is the interface that is most commonly going to be seen when developing a web map with ArcGIS Online. We have been using this interactive mapping interface by first scheduling a Zoom meeting with all the stakeholders who have voiced interest to participate, offer information, being able to provide a short presentation of a background of the mission of the restoration plan, different types of categories that can potentially be identified by the stakeholders we're conversing with, and being able to importantly explain the different annotation features that are being used to be able to use this method effectively, including by annotating the screen. And through live interactive capabilities through ArcGIS Online, people are able to actively annotate the screen, and through real time, we're able to add point data for reference for further investigation and site visits and further coordination of developing project plans to include in the restoration plan. Now, I'll give you an example of what this looks like a little bit more zoomed in. This is the total project area for the San Juan River Restoration Plan. This is the brief overall that we're using at the very beginning. And then depending on the stakeholder that you're talking with, we zoom in. So this is an example from the city of Bloomfield along the San Juan. As you can see, there are already plenty of let me get that back up there so you can see we did categorize different shapefiles based off of restoration potential. Anything from restoration, recreation improvements, to solid waste management, to erosion, pasture and agricultural areas that may need some work, the like. And so through coordination with the city of Bloomfield, we were able to identify, as we discussed, different concerns of that can be noted. Here at Bloomfield Wash, it's about a 6-mile wash that is contributing heavy amount of sediment. And so by them actively annotating the screen, we're able to add data, include notes of the concern that was expressed, the informant name if they wish to be identified for us to continue to coordinate further, and different notes, anything from projects that have already been done, the focus of this concern, and what actions that stakeholder would like to have taken in the future. And this also builds a great transparent method of communication where all the stakeholders participating in the meeting can see the information that is being collected, knowing that it's being used for the purposes of not pointing the finger at anybody, but being able to identify restoration potential that can be included for future funding as it's included in the San Juan River Restoration Plan. So this is one example of a creative tool that we've been using. I hope this is very informative for you all. It has worked greatly for the San Juan Watershed Group in the past, currently, and going into the future. And I am going to be going back to the presentation slide in just a second. And we're back. So some lessons learned that we've been reflecting on for this San Juan River restoration planning process. One of the main takeaways is to not focus on starting a movement, but building on the movement that already exists. There are plenty of stakeholders that are already conducting great work. Going back to the example of Dene College was already conducting an inventory of restoration potential, the current environmental conditions on the San Juan River on the Navajo Nation side that really coincided with the work that the San Juan Watershed Group is doing. And by partnering up with these stakeholders that are already doing great work, it is a focus on developing an interconnected web of a watershed network where people can be able to share information, see where there's a potential to collaborate with the same goals, be able to see what there are data gaps that other partners have already identified that others may have not, so that there's not reinventing of the wheel and you're able to continue with the momentum that many stakeholders are already doing. Another key takeaway is that depending on your project, it can be a very large scale. As you can see here, this is from a virtual Zoom San Juan Watershed Group meeting. All of those black boxes are different priority areas that are based off of community input, water quality impairments, and local knowledge. And it is a huge swath of area to look at. So biggest advice I can give is to tackle it in sections. Don't get overwhelmed. Take it piece by piece. Also important is that I've learned throughout this process is to not reach out to everyone at once. At the very beginning, we were unsure on the type of feedback that we would be getting from stakeholders and reached out to multiple stakeholders at once, which led to a heavy few couple of weeks trying to balance coordinating with all of these folks who were open and happy to be able to be involved. So don't reach out to everyone at once. Everyone will be happy, depending on your project, to be able to share information and collaborate. Also, as a key takeaway is to maintain transparency. Always be able to share the mission of your project, the work plan, the process that is involved, so that people are able to find how they are able to be involved and be able to build trust with personal relationships. And finally, one biggest key takeaway is to not everyone is an expert and knows everything about water quality and watershed science. Sometimes the most important questions lead to an answer of, I'm not sure about that. That's a great question. Let's look more into that. That identifies gaps that may need more research. And that is the embodiment of the scientific process, seeing what you don't know so we can see what can be done to be able to answer those questions. I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to share our work. Again, my name is Alyssa Richmond with the San Juan Watershed Group. My contact information is below. Feel free to reach out any time, and I am open to answering any and all of your questions. Thank you very much. Have a great conference.